Welcome, everyone. Today we're speaking with Professor Robert Marks, who is a professor emeritus of history and environmental studies at Whittier College. And Bob, I understand that you taught there for 41 years before you retired in 2019. So can you tell us a little bit about your career?
Well, I don't want to do an entire intellectual biography, but I was hired to teach Chinese and Asian history at Whittier College, and that's what my research was as well. Most of my publications until this book have all been on Chinese or world history, and so I also taught world history to freshmen and sophomores, which is and over 41 years, it's the age group cohort is the same, but the students change. And that experience led to me writing one of my books that's actually it's still in press after 25 years. It's sixth edition. It's called The Origins of the Modern World, a non-Eurocentric and environmentally based narrative. And that was a lot of fun, and I had fun because it challenged students' ideas about how the world got to be the way it is.
And this new book, Deep Time in the Mono Lake Basin, does seem to be a little bit of a departure from what you've done before. I've seen you're well known for books that they span vast topics. I mean, you've talked
Yes.
about this book literally covering the entire scope of history from 1400 to the present, and your 2024 book, The History of China, Environmental History of China, spanning 5,000 years, from prehistoric times. But this one, it focuses on a very particular location, the Mono Lake Basin, which I think is understand it's in California, kind of near the Nevada border, or the Mono Lake
Uh,
itself is.
yes, it
So
is.
what made you decide to take on this relatively narrow topic, although lengthy in time because it goes back about 10,000 years?
Um, well, it turns out that this area is connected to the city of Los Angeles and Southern California by a major freeway, as well as an aqueduct that the city of Los Angeles was using to take the water. And this developed in the 1950s and 60s as a ski area and a recreation area. A huge world-class ski area is 15 miles to the south of me here. It's called Mammoth Mountain. And I started coming up here in the winter to ski and stayed for the summers. So my wife and I, she was on the faculty of Whittier College as well. And we decided 25 years ago that this is where we wanted to be when we retired. And so we built a house here and in 2019 retired full time here. And we would come up here 2 or 3 times a year for various reasons, driving through the Eastern Sierra, the Owens Valley, which is it's a world apart because it's a high desert. But the water that comes into both the Mono Basin and into the Owens Valley comes from the snow melt. We get 400 inches of snow a year here,
Hmm.
and and the city of Los Angeles wanted it and took it.
Which turns out to be a fairly fundamental part of the history of this area. Now, tell us also about the Mono Lake, which I think a lot of people, like myself, had never heard of it. I mean, we knew the Dead Sea, we knew the Great Salt Lake, but even the existence of an inland lake, which is I'm forgetting the correct term for it, but one which does not have outlets.
It's a saline lake.
Yes.
So, um, environmentally and topographically, we are not in California. We are in the Great Basin. The Great Basin stretches from here over to Great Salt Lake and then north to the Snake River and then south to the Mojave Desert. And this is the one place in the Western Hemisphere that no fresh water ever gets out. It comes into basins, it pools in various places. Great Salt Lake is one of them. Mono Lake is another. To the north of us is Lake Ebert in eastern Oregon. And what happens as the fresh water comes in and it evaporates, the dissolved salts remain, and the lakes get saltier and more saline over time. That does not mean it's a Dead Sea. It's an
Right.
extraordinarily vibrant ecosystem, and all of these salt lakes are. Um, And the problem with Salt Lakes, and Great Salt Lake is experiencing this right now, is that the fresh water is diverted out for various purposes. And in Utah, those purposes are for agriculture, farming, and ranching for the most part. The same up in Lake Ebert, and that was the same case here in Mono Lake. Um, but that it had this the I guess misfortune of being more or less uphill from the city of Los Angeles. And the water can be taken out, and it doesn't take much to pump it. It just flows by gravity. Where, as I said, the lake itself is at about 6,400 feet above sea level. Los Angeles is, well, it's at the at sea level, and mostly water flows downhill.
Um,
So,
it's an it is an ecologically fascinating place from what I saw in the book, with the starting on the basis of the algae and the alkali flies right up through the pronghorns. Um,
yes,
but I think most of your book, however, is about the people starting from several thousand years ago. And
yes.
so, what can we learn, or what can the reader who takes on this book learn about the people who dwelt in this basin, especially during the pre-Euro-American era?
Right. Well, the a couple of things are interesting. One is that, and I had this belief as well, or this misunderstanding. That is that the Great Basin, the environment of the Great Basin, which is basically sagebrush and punctuated with islands of uh, mountain ranges that have pines and other things on them. You sort of assume that this is the way the environment has always been. But it wasn't. The environment changes without necessarily having any human activity in it. And the environment that we see here emerged over a period of about 5,000 years after the end of the last ice age, the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene. And uh, during the last ice ages, what had been here, the vegetation, retreated. It
Hmm,
moved further south to where the it was happier there. But when the climate started to change again, one of these uh, trees, it's a pinyon pine that was in the Mojave Desert, about 300 miles to the south. As the climate changed and warmed up here and got a little wetter, it the pinyon pine started migrating.
right.
So about 5,000 years ago, the pinyon pines are in the area. People have been coming up through this area maybe since the end of the last ice age, perhaps 15,000 years ago. The evidence of them being here is maybe 10,000 years ago. Um, Hunter-gatherers, the evidence is all it's points of one kind or another, darts, arrows, spears. Um, but what made possible the year-round settlement of the basin by people,
Hmm.
instead of just passing through following game, was the pinyon pine and pronghorn. The pinyon pine has seeds that are extraordinarily nutritious. They come about and can be harvested every year, mostly every 2 years, and then roasted to yield up the pinyon pine uh, nuts. And that made it possible to store food over the winter and for people to stay here for a very long time. Pronghorn also were part of that. An amazing animal, the fastest land animal in North America, that survived the end of the last. It survived through all of the ice ages, and the predators that went after it before the Holocene were gone by the end of the Pleistocene, and so they had no real predators over here, except when humans got here and humans discovered how to round them up into these amazing traps, and then on an annual, sometimes biannual time, kill them. 100, 200 at a time.
It
Um,
was it was quite extraordinary to me to read in the book the level of detail which you were able to assemble, even from things that happened thousands of years ago,
yeah,
and not to mention in the last 2 centuries as well. And it made me really wonder to record this. this history, you must have relied on a vast range of both primary and secondary sources. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of them, the prehistoric era, the archaeological evidence, and even maybe a little bit more into the modern era. You have a great comprehensive description of land allotments and the Mono Lake Paiutes, I think. I think this couldn't have been possible without access to quite a lot of detailed local sources.
Well, the prior to the middle of the 19th century, um, the what we know about the Mono Lake Basin and the people here and the environment comes from work of paleoanthropologists who have done just some absolutely fascinating work. Um, Fortunately, we're on the edge of the Great Basin, and so a lot of this work is done on the Great Basin. But they were able to chart the movement of people with the pinyon pine cones. They were able to chart the use of these traps using archaeological methods, using other extraordinary methods. And I can do a little side trip for just half a second. They were able to reconstruct periods of drought and periods of cold, periods of wet weather, and to then be able to put together the evidence left by humans with the evidence of climate change and the changing environment as well. And so that chapter on the period prior to the middle of the 19th century really relies on the work of those extraordinary paleoanthropologists who are out there walking around collecting stuff and trying to put things together into a coherent story. So just as a side trip, because your viewers might be interested in the question, are no doubt interested in the issue of climate and climate change.
Yes.
Uh, yes. So about 60 miles, no, 60 to 80 miles south of here, near a town called Big Pine, in the White Mountains. The Sierra Nevada, I'm facing west right now, and the Sierra Nevada, I'm looking at them. To the east of us is another mountain range called the White Mountains.
Hmm.
So in between is this valley that go, connects us down to Los Angeles. Well, in the White Mountain Range is a fantastic tree called the white bark pine.
Hmm.
Uh, and there's another pine tree up there as well. But these trees can live 4 to 8,000 years.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. And so in the 1950s, a researcher at the University of California began to take tree ring samples from, oh, and because they're filled with resin, if they fall over, they don't deteriorate.
Mm.
They're there. So he had a record of living trees and then down trees of 8,000 years, and began doing tree ring studies to calibrate climate based on the width of the tree rings. And so that's just right by here.
What an extraordinary resource that is.
So some of the early reconstructions of past climates came from the work of scientists who were studying tree rings.
Hmm.
And we're right here. So, it's a extraordinarily hot spot for lots of reconstruction of past climates.
Right.
Uh, and of course, we have to think about the effect of climate change on what it's going to do to the whole area here. So that's the pre-19th century stuff.
Hmm.
19th century stuff brings Euro-American settlers, conquerors, the American state, then the California state, all trying to make sure that they can count people, collect taxes, and keep the arms of the government going. Police,
Hmm.
state, armies, all of that. Um, Now, when we get, I don't know if you want me to go into the 19th century stuff because there's some marvelous sources. Governments do all kinds of things, and some of the first evidence of what governments did here was to have a surveyor literally cast a surveyed net over all of the West and California, dividing it up into small blocks that could be alienated and sold. So, in other words, the U.S. government in 1857 said all of this land is our land, you know, Woody Guthrie, but it's this land, it's our land, and we can dispose of it as we want, and
Mm,
mostly that's either by sale or to homesteaders or other things
right.
like that to get people to come here in the wake of the gold rush.
So in a lot of the in a lot of the things you've just said, you've started to touch on some of the major forces that have been impacting this area, the ecology and the population over the time period you covered. I mean, agriculture and probably especially starting from the 19th century, later on
Yeah.
things like hydroelectric power, and then the very surprising to me was fishing.
Yes. Before I get into that, can I re
Please.
introduce an idea that I got from teaching and that I wanted my students to understand? And that's the idea of historical contingency. You know, most students and a lot of people assume that the world that we live in is the way it had to turn out.
Mm,
It all the way from, there's Judeo-Christian origins of that idea as well. But the idea of contingency is that the way things happened in the past were contingent. And what happened and what we count as history is contingent upon what people did, what people didn't do on climate, all kinds of other things. And so, how we get to the world of the 19th and 20th centuries in the and now the 21st century, in the world or in California in the Mono Lake Basin, is contingent. Now, the reason why that's an important idea um, is that if the way the world turned out was not inevitable, if the domination of the world by European states was not inevitable, that there were other contingent outcomes, the world could have been different. If the world could have been different, if the past is contingent, so too is the future.
hmm
In other words, it is not written that the world that we are experiencing with global warming, et cetera, has to be the one that we inhabit. It's contingent upon what we and others do here and now to change it, to bend it, to say, no, that's not where we want to go. We want to do something else. And having an idea that of this contingency makes it possible to have the strength to do what needs to be done. We can make a difference,
Right.
right? That's that's in fact the point. Why study history? Well, to make it not just to see what the heck happened, but to be able to say, um, we can affect the world in different ways. So, a lot of what happened in the Mono Basin um, looks like it might have been sort of inevitable.
hmm
Gold strike, Euro-American settlers encouraged to come here by the giving away of Kuzetica, that's the native people's land. The dispossession of indigenous peoples from the West is just a major way of making the United States become a major economic power by 1900. Um, all of that. Um, and what's interesting in the Mono Lake Basin is land was not the only resource. The
Right.
resource that people wanted, perhaps more than land, was water.
Which has
And
been the
so
story of that part of the world in general, I think.
that's the story of the American West is water and indigenous people, right? That's what
Right.
happens with water and indigenous people is much of the story of the American West. And that's basically what happened. And the geography, the topography, the geology of where we are, that is where, oh, and I have my poster for when I do book talks on
Oh,
the
well
on
done.
those are scheduled, they're coming up. But literally, I'm at about 7,600 feet here. Um, the uh, the crest is about 12,000 feet.
Right.
The water melts and comes cascading down through waterfalls,
Mm,
and it makes a tremendous amount of noise. And so early on, the use of water in the Mono Lake Basin for agriculture was it made possible any number of things, but that wasn't the only use for water. And
mhm,
this guy, J.S. Kane, who got rich in the gold mines not too far from here, realized that that water could be tapped to
mm,
hydroelectric power. And in a very short period of time, the first 25 years of the 20th century, he got the rights to water for hydroelectric power. And by 1924, basically all the sources of water were dammed for reservoirs for the
which
private
has a
profit.
profound impact on the area.
Yes, it does. So, so he bought up agricultural land, all kinds of land with water rights, and by 1925, the hydrology of the Mono Lake Basin is controlled by people, by for profit, by corporations, um, and not for, well, nature. It's a radical rupture in the relationship of human beings to nature and natural processes in the Eastern Sierra in general. And so there are now, they're still here. There are three hydroelectric projects here,
Hmm.
uh, and they've been owned, and the ownership has changed. Right now, it's owned by a company called Southern California Edison, which is a huge
It's an energy
electric
company.
energy company based in Southern California. Um, and the water is still being used to generate power, and it makes up maybe 2 or 3% of Southern California Edison's supply.
Mm.
But they want to keep this. They want to keep these dams. They want to keep these projects because they point to it as sources of green energy. We're
Right,
not
because
burning,
hydroelectric is still green.
right. We're not burning any uh, fossil fuels to generate electricity. And isn't that good for us?
Well, I did
I,
notice you compared the
that's
theoretical equivalent energy that could be produced by a gas-fired power plant and the greenhouse gas emissions. They were measured in pounds and not tons, which gives you an idea of the scale.
right.
Now, one of the interesting things about, I think, starting from maybe the second half of part one, going on through the
Yeah.
second part of the book, is that it's not only the story of great forces, but individuals. And we've already talked about this guy, J.S. Kane, who sounds like a real piece of work, but you also do a very good job of letting the voices of the individual inhabitants come through. For example, the 10, and I think the right term for it is the Mono Lake Indians and their land allotments.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
these are very personal, individual stories. And maybe if there's one you could talk about that really spoke to you more than others.
Well, that's probably Henry Jameson. So, first of all, let me say that the sources that make these voices come through um, are part of the management of Indian affairs that the U.S. government has spread out all over the entire West. There are Indian agencies
Mhm.
run to manage Indian affairs. At first it was to suppress any opposition, but then doing other things. So the closest Indian agency is 60 miles to the south of us in Bishop.
Mm.
And the Indian agents are involved in the affairs of local people under their jurisdiction throughout the U.S. and up here as well. So, and I don't know the particular part of this story. There's an interesting part of it, but at the turn of the 20th century, um, late 19th century, the U.S. government decided that it wanted to make it possible for Indians on reservations in particular throughout the West to own land. It had been owned collectively, and this stood in the way of railroads. It stood in the way of further development, and an attempt to take collectively owned Indian land and transfer it to individuals. And you might say, well, that sounds like a darn good idea. Well, what it did is it took reservations that were millions of acres and gave the individual families, 40 acres, 80 acres, leaving another 500,000 acres open for railroads and land developers. And so
Right.
it was attack on the reservations. But part of that act, the Dawes Act, made it possible for non-tribal, non-reservation Indians to get access to land and land ownership, um, up to 160 acres. And since the Paiutes, the Zetica people, the indigenous peoples of the Mono Basin, had all their land taken. At the turn of the century, there were 10, maybe 12. Uh, most of the it was men, but it didn't have to be men. It
Hmm.
was open to women as well. Applied for and received 160 acres of land in the Mono Lake Basin, cheek to jowl with the Euro-American
Hmm.
homesteaders. The homesteaders got 160 acres. The Paiute allotments were 160 acres for the most part,
But with
and
different rules.
different rules. Yes. Well, the most important rule is that they didn't own it outright to begin with. They
Hmm.
it was being held in trust for them because, well, you give Indians some land and you don't know if they're going to take care of it the way white people take care of it and develop it and put it to its highest use, which is agriculture for the most part and ranching. So 10 families and individuals got allotments in the Mono Lake Basin. And all of this correspondence involves the uh, Indian Agency in Bishop. Now, for reasons that are really peculiar, and I've tried to track it down, the actual files, the files that the Indian agent on Bishop had um, got digitized
Hmm.
sometime in the past 30 years um, and are located at a community college in northern Utah.
Right.
So, so I was able to find these online,
Amazing.
and they have all of these 10 families were involved. And the reason I chose Henry Jameson, uh, Jameson was well known as being one of the best trackers in the Eastern Sierra. He was one of the best horse raisers as well. Um, and he had a family. He had several children. Um, and his allotment was on the lower reaches of Lee Vining Creek.
Hmm.
And in 19, I think it was 1919, his son got very ill. It might have been there is evidence that the influenza epidemic had reached up here. I don't know
So
if
it could have been influenza.
could have been influenza, could have been something else. And Henry Jameson wanted to take his son to a doctor, but he didn't have the cash. He figured it would cost him about $100 to travel and take his son to get to see a doctor. And so he turned initially to J.S. Kane and said, can you lend me the money?"
The hydroelectric baron.
Yes, the hydroelectric baron, who also owned land.
Hmm.
Um, but and so Henry himself was not literate, so he had somebody write this letter to J.S. Kane, and his pained voice comes through so clearly. He says, "My son is ill. I I need $100," and he couldn't get it any other way than by going to Kane because he did not own his land outright.
Right.
It was held in trust for him by the U.S. government. And what that meant is that, many of us who come up with, we have problems or we want to do something, you can get a second loan on your house. You can mortgage it. You can sell parts of it. You can do all that. Henry didn't have that right ability to do because it was held in trust for 25 years. So he had to go to Cade for a $100 loan to save his son. And
So do
we
we know
know,
if Kane gave him the loan?
don't know.
Hmm.
I That is not in the documents. But his son survived. He lived. And the first time we see him mentioned in a document is in 1923 when Henry Jameson files paperwork with the Bishop Indian Agency to have his the 25 years in trust lifted so he can own his land outright. And his son is one who does
So
the
he
paperwork.
stuck it out.
And he was one of the first to get outright ownership of his land
Right.
out from underneath the trust of the United States government. And I found him to be just a really, really interesting guy. We have photographs of him. It's interesting.
Hmm.
There are other interesting people as well. the
Well, yeah,
stories.
but you got to read the book to find out their stories.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
So
I mean, one of the interesting things as well is when we come into um, the 20th century, then we start to see this relationship with the growing city of Los Angeles, the water needs, and
yes.
an extraordinary number of corporate and legal shenanigans going on. And at that
Yes.
point, the book starts to be something less of a personal story of these individuals and this almost a corporate and legal and governmental war. And I think it's in line with your comment just a few minutes ago about the contingency. What do you think we can learn from this era? And in terms of the impact on the era, and on that era, and sorry, impact on that area, and what we can learn from this era.
Well, um, especially with Euro-American settlers and the family farm as being the basis for an agricultural economy. Pretty soon, especially after the Civil War, capital gets accumulated in vast quantities through the industrialization of the East, and the capital that's accumulated in the West is centered largely in Denver for various reasons. The city of Los Angeles developed rather rapidly as well, and there's vast amounts of capital being accumulated there as well. So pretty soon it's turning from family farms to vast corporate accumulations of capital, and that capital is put to use in the Eastern Sierra on in hydroelectric power development.
Hmm,
And so pretty soon, and the founders of the major hydroelectric power companies, the main one is called Southern Sierra Power Company, are funded by um, capital from Denver. The many of the individuals are from Denver. The lawyers are from Denver. Their headquarters is in Denver. The loans that they get for building the hydroelectric system comes from a Denver bank. So it's
mhm,
it's the age of emerging capital.
mm,
That's what happens. So we get caught up in global um, just simply the globalization of capital, and it gets
mhm,
mobilized and it gets used in a small place like
mhm.
the Mono Lake Basin, and that has dramatic effects on people.
We
Um,
see in microcosm there what is happening on a global scale.
yes, yeah,
Mm,
not just not, and you could say this is ironic, but it wasn't just the indigenous people who were dispossessed of their land, but the mobilization of capital for the hydroelectric projects made it possible to to dispossess the Euro-American settler farmers. They lost their land.
mhm,
It was bought up and monopolized by Kane and his companies, which were then merged with Southern Sierra's power company. And
mm,
so all of a sudden, those farmers are losing their land. And this is in the 1930s, where throughout the U.S. the Great Depression is dispossessing farmers of their land. Here, it's a slightly different process, but they're being dispossessed of their land, and so not only is water being the hydrology being controlled by humans, but the economy is being controlled by corporate interests.
well, that doesn't sound unfamiliar at all.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't, does it?
But moving on to a slightly more optimistic area, in the last part of the book, we go from the ecological catastrophe that happened in the
Yes.
Mono Lake Basin to something like a story of hope with the, restoration, well, the environmental restoration of the area. So what was it that allowed this to happen?
Well, first of all, the peculiarity of the monopolization of land and water in the Mono Basin in the hands of those hydroelectric development companies led them to say, well, we actually don't want to be in the business of owning land in the Eastern Sierra. We want to do hydroelectric power. And so they decided to sell it, to sell all their holdings.
Hmm.
And they tried to sell it in 1923 to the city of Los Angeles, the Department of Water and Power. But for various reasons, they weren't interested. But toward the end of the 1920s, the city of Los Angeles became interested in buying the properties of the Southern Sierras Power Company. And when they did that, that transformed the ownership of land and water rights in the Mono Lake Basin into the hands of one entity. The city of Los
Uh,
Angeles
right.
owned that land and water. So when the city of Los Angeles began diverting all the water out, by the 1970s, it was an ecological disaster.
Mm.
Um, but when uh, organizations, then individuals, began suing the city of Los Angeles for the ecological damage it had been doing, there was only one entity that had to be addressed and sued, and that was the city of Los Angeles.
Because it had already been consolidated.
It had already been consolidated. So if you look at what's happening in Great Salt Lake right now, they're trying to get water back into the lake to protect it. But there isn't one entity that controls it all. It's farmers and ranchers, hundreds of
Hmm.
them. But this peculiarity of what had happened in the Mono Lake Basin meant that there was one entity that could be sued. It was brought to court. It was found to be liable both for the ecological damage and then in 1994 by the State Water Board, it was found to be responsible for restoring the ecological system to what it was prior to 1941. You know,
And
you, the city of Los Angeles,
right.
you are responsible. You alone have been found guilty of destroying the
So
environment and you are being held accountable for restoring it.
so much as it seems like last week, that it's now 2026 and 19, I think 94 you said was a few years ago.
Yeah.
So what does it look like today? Is its future secured?
Well, it's tenuous. There's nothing secure about it. Um, the the 1994 finding said that Los Angeles, you can't take all the water. You have to leave some water there for what are the doctrine is known as the public trust doctrine, that you can't just simply destroy environments. The public has an interest in the ability of these environments to remain. And so the idea is that the city of Los Angeles had to allow enough water going through the streams into the lake to raise the lake to a level that scientists had figured out was ecologically sustainable over long periods of time. And in the last 30 years, 32 years now, the lake has never reached that level.
Mhm.
It is still 10 or so feet below. And so every time there's a drought, as there was in 22, up to 2022, there's a 6 year drought. The lake level declined to a point where the ecological system, the biotic system, was about to unravel again. That got saved because of what we call snowmageddon. We had a massive winter.
Hmm.
It was unbelievable in 2022, 23. And so water flowed back in. But the city of Los Angeles still claims the right to take water out of this. And so there's been a constant push, largely from the Mono Lake Committee, which has been battling the city of Los Angeles since its formation in 1979, um, to revisit the 1994 finding to say it isn't working. It's not bringing the lake level up to an ecologically sustainable level. The streams have been restored. The riparian corridors have been restored. There are beaver ponds now. It's not like we're dried out and desiccated,
Hmm.
you know, but it's not a healthy, self-sustaining, functioning ecosystem.
Right.
And so uh, we have hope. The Mono Lake Committee has hope that the State Water Board will have a hearing in the next year or two to revisit what it said the city of Los Angeles was required to do in 1994. Now, the city of Los Angeles, for its part, largely under the pressure for the Mono Lake Committee and with the help of the Mono Lake Committee, for the last 40 years has been investing heavily in recycling and of water in lots of different ways. And they've just put online a new water recycling uh, facility that when it comes online, the president of the uh, Department of Water and Power said, we may no longer need to take any water from Mono Lake.
And that would be that would certainly be a success.
It would, but he said, But we're not going to give up our water rights because you never know.
Because you never know. Now, before we close, I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you for a recommendation from your reading list. If you've got bookshelves behind you, um,
Yeah.
anything especially environmental books that you'd like to recommend to the readers, to our reader.
Yes, I do. I do. Um, Dan Flores,
Wild
Wild,
New World.
the epic story of animals and peoples in the Americas, in
Right.
North America. This is a wonderful book. You get to know animals and people in lots of different ways. And Dan Flores is a wonderful environmental historian. There's one other that we didn't get to touch on, but I do want to. It's a huge, important topic. That is the rights of nature.
Ah, yes.
Right? And so this was Christopher Stone wrote this in 1972 to
Hmm.
try to get the U.S. Supreme Court to act in a particular way that would have given the rights of nature to a particular valley that the Disney company wanted to turn into a ski resort. But the thing is that the doctrine of the public trust doctrine um, does not recognize the rights of nature to exist without human beings. The public trust doctrine says that the environment needs to be protected for further human enjoyment, right?
Right. So that's a different type of rights we're talking about.
Do trees have standing? Does water have standing? Um, Regardless of whether or not human beings are improved or not improved by it. So, the public trust doctrine is an anthropocentric version of environmental protection.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We've been talking to Bob Marks. The book
Thank you.
is Deep Time in the Mono Lake Basin, and thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciated the conversation, and I appreciate the attention that Earth.org is giving to, well, not just this, but all the issues that you're taking up. So thank you very much, Genevieve.
Thanks so much.